the last episode, I told you that my dad was an amazing person and that there was no way I could capture all of who he was in just a few lines. So today, I want to keep that promise. If you're new here, my name is Alana Lynn, and this is the Ashes to Aligned podcast. Normally, I share stories and lessons about what it's like to love someone struggling with addiction and how to heal from the codependency, guilt, and exhaustion that so often comes with that. But this episode is a little different because while my dad's drinking shaped many of my early patterns, that's not the whole picture of who he was. He was complex, he was layered, and honestly, one of the kindest and most generous people you could ever meet. So, this conversation is about honoring that fuller picture of the man he was, the challenges he faced, and the legacy he left. And as I tell his story, I also want to shine a light on something important. How, even in the same family, our experiences of the same person can be worlds apart. My dad had a childhood that left a lot of invisible scars. While my mom witnessed physical abuse in her childhood, my dad's pain came from emotional abuse. There are many stories, but just one example he shared was that his parents would literally put him on a stool between them and make him pick sides during their arguments. Imagine being a little boy in that kind of environment, forced to choose between mom and dad. That leaves an emotional mark. And yet, despite growing up in a house, I won't call it a home, where his parents were either completely absent or hostile, my dad grew into one of the kindest, most giving souls people encounter. He was so loved. And people often say everyone loved him, but my dad was truly loved by everyone he met. He was a deep thinker and deeply spiritual. I can still see him kicked back in his office chair, his feet up on his desk, and a pipe hanging out the corner of his mouth. And I'd watch him as he stared at his hands. His hands were really big, and he would flex them open and then clench them and flex them open. And he'd do that over and over. And I just assumed that his hands hurt. I mean, he was a contractor after all. But my stepmom told me that when he did that, he was imagining what it must have felt like for Jesus to have his hands nailed to the cross. That's how deeply my dad felt things. He was generous to a fault. We lived in a very rural part of Southern Ohio, and dad owned a paving and excavating company. And some of the men who worked for dad lived far as like 30, 40 minutes away. And one of the guys, his truck broke down. So dad gave him mom's car so he could get back and forth to work so he could make a living to support his family and make the money that he needed to get his truck fixed. He made sure that everyone who worked for him and worked with him, other contractors, had ham or turkey for the holidays. And when his church wanted to build a new church on a new location, my understanding is he did all of that site work for free. The same with a Christian college that was being built, did all the site work for free. If someone needed help, he was there. If someone needed something he owned, he would give it without hesitation. And people loved him for it because he showed everyone else kindness and compassion first. Now, I've shared how his drinking shaped me as a child, and that's true. But it's not the whole picture, because here's another truth. My dad spent the last 35 years of his life sober. 35 years of living in alignment with the best of who he was. Both of those things, the drinking years and the sober years, are part of his story, and both shaped me. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The year after dad passed away, I made a Facebook post that I thought was a tribute to dad. That's how it was intended. I wrote something like, they say a girl's dad is her first love, and that was true for me. He was also the first person who taught me the challenges that come from loving someone who struggles with alcohol or addiction. But he was also the first person who taught me people can change because he spent the last 35 years of his life sober. He showed me what's possible when someone decides to turn their life around. And I'm so incredibly grateful for all that my dad taught me. I meant it to honor dad, to recognize both the struggle and the incredible victory of his sobriety. But my half brother, my same dad, different moms, he is 14 years older than me. He did not see it that way. He was furious with my post. And I got a text from him, and I can't remember what all was said, but I remember this part. You made dad sound like a drunk. I'll be honest, I didn't see it coming. To me, it felt like an attack because I genuinely thought I was honoring dad. And I was so confused. And I stood there looking at my phone thinking, dad drank heavily every single day. And by any standards, that was alcoholism. No, dad didn't fit the stereotypical image of a drunk. He didn't live under a bridge, but he drank a lot. And it was well known. Dad even joked about it himself and would say things like, I think all that drinking pickled me. Or, you know, I'm well preserved. That's why I've lived to be so old. And he did. He lived a robust lifestyle until he was 93 and a half. But my brother insisted he never saw dad drink, ever. And I was like, how is that possible? I mean, I remember the flask in the console of dad's truck, or sometimes it was under the seat, or sometimes it was over the visor. I remember how happy he would be when he got a cold and he was prescribed cough syrup because then he could carry that little bottle around in his pocket and just sip from it all day long. I can still see him smiling with a little dimple in his cheek because he would grin about it. When I got that text, I was hurt, and underneath that hurt, I was angry because to me, it felt like he was erasing or trying to erase something that had shaped my whole life. I mean, how dare my brother try to rewrite my history? And I kept thinking, he's basically saying that this huge thing that so heavily impacted my life never happened. My mind was blown. So I called my mom and said, he's telling me he never saw dad drink. How is that possible? And mom said it's probably true. By the time your dad's drinking got really bad, he, my brother, was grown and married and living his own life. He probably didn't see it or he didn't recognize it for what it was. And I was like, okay, that sort of makes sense to me if it was limited to, just a few years. But there was like a 10-year stretch where this was dad's life. And he quit drinking when he met my stepmom when I was 19. He realized if he didn't get it together, he was going to lose a woman who loved him very much and he loved very much. So he went to her house for a week. She was a nurse and she helped him through the detox. And they told everyone he had the flu. And then he just never drank liquor again, which to me is also an incredible part of my dad's story. No rehab, no meetings. He just quit. And he didn't exhibit any of those dry drunk symptoms that sometimes show up in situations like that. So my next call was to my stepmom. It was the same question. How could he have not known? And she said, your dad was a highly functioning alcoholic. He was really good at hiding it when he felt like he needed to. So here's the truth. My brother's experience with dad was very different. Alcohol simply wasn't a part of his relationship with him. But that doesn't erase my experience. Neither of us is lying. Neither of us is wrong. We just live different realities of the same man. And if you've lived in a family touched by addiction or dysfunction or even just high stress, you've probably seen this too. One sibling seems to carry the brunt of the chaos, while another somehow escapes. One, or escapes at least most of it. One remembers the storm, and the other says, "What storm?" I even saw this with friends growing up. Their mom and my mom are best friends. So we spent a lot of time together. And they had four kids, a girl, boy, girl, boy. And the oldest boy was my age. And he used to talk about how his parents locked him in the basement. And his siblings insist, like, no, they didn't. They would never do that. That's crazy. But he always maintained that they did. Here's the thing. I have this fuzzy memory of being in that basement once. It was a finished basement. I mean, like they had a family room and a bedroom. I think they had a pool table and TV and stuff. It wasn't some like creepy dungeon. And I remember standing at the top of the stairs trying to get out, and the door was locked. I don't know if it somehow accidentally got locked, like, the little thing got turned, or if the other kids were messing with us. But I remember that moment. His experience around that situation is very different from his siblings. And even my two sons, Gray and Dusty, they had completely different experiences growing up in the same house with the same parents. Dusty is 8 years older than Gray, so how things were for him were completely different than for Gray. But this isn't limited to an environment of kids where kids grow up in. No two people live the same story in the same way, not even in the same house, in the same family. Mine and my husband's experiences and our perspectives of having two sons struggling with addiction was very different. I remember one night I was transferring money to one of their bank accounts so that they could get a hotel for the night. And Charles was kept telling me not to do it. And I was torn because this was pretty early on in our journey on the road to hell. And I said, but if I don't give him the money, they'll have to sleep outside. And I will never forget. He just kind of looked at me and shrugged and said, well, and I was like, well, what? I can't let our boys sleep outside on the street. The thought of that was traumatizing to me. Charles was of the opinion that when they got themselves into this mess, they need to figure out how to get out. And he wasn't wrong. I just wasn't in the same emotional place he was to come to the same conclusion yet. And even now, like Gray's and my relationship and experience with Dusty is very different. Dusty texted me the other day to give me his new number. I knew Gray had some information he wanted to share with Dusty, so I texted Dusty back and asked him if he would please call Gray, and I gave him Gray's number. And surprisingly, happily surprised, he called Gray immediately. Gray didn't answer, so Dusty texted me back and said, hey, I left him a message. I talked to Gray later that day, and I asked him, did you talk to Dusty? And he said, yeah, briefly. And I waited and I waited and I waited for him to say more. That was it. You know, I wanted details. I wanted to know every single word Dusty said. Hearing from Dusty is a really big deal to me. And I want to hold on to every second of every conversation. I want to know every word he says because it's my connection to him. It's my only connection to him right now. To Gray, it was just a quick conversation relaying some information he needed to tell Dusty. Gray's and my points of view, our experiences, our feelings, emotions, it's all very different when it comes to Dusty. Same person, but Gray and I are different people. Our relationship with Dusty is different. So our reactions and interactions are different. So why does this matter? Well, because when we love someone who's struggling with addiction, it's easy to expect everyone else to see things the way we do, to feel the same things we feel. And when they don't, it can create conflict. Take my husband, Charles, and me. We both loved our boys, but Charles wasn't codependent, and I was. which meant he had far less tolerance than I did. And that difference caused a lot of conflict between us. If we had had three kids, two who struggled with addiction, one who didn't, those perspectives would all look different too. Gray, who's lived it, will always see things differently than a sibling who hasn't walked that road. Even within the family, even within the women of a family, a mom, a grandma, an aunt, you'll have three completely different lenses. So here's the key. It's important not to get angry just because someone else doesn't see things the way you do. It doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make them wrong. It simply means you're looking through different filters, which are shaped by our personal experiences. And when your experience with someone is different than someone else's, and they say, that's not how it happened, it can be disoriented. It can make you doubt yourself. It can make you question your memory. It can silence your voice, like happened to me for a couple of years, or cause you to shrink back from your own truth, especially if that person is family, especially if it's someone who, quote, should have seen what you saw or what you experienced. They didn't experience the same way, but you think they should. But here's what you need to know. Your truth is still your truth. Your experience is still valid. And healing doesn't come from everyone agreeing on one version of the story, whether that's something from the past or a situation with you're dealing with right now. Healing comes from honoring your perspective without blame, without apology, without needing a vote of approval from anyone else. So maybe you didn't grow up with an alcoholic father. Maybe your childhood story looks nothing like mine. But right now, you're living through your own version of this. Maybe you and your partner don't agree on how to handle your child's addiction. Maybe your siblings argue about what's really happening with mom or dad. Maybe you feel completely alone because the people around you don't see or don't want to see what you're living every day. That's where this message matters most. Your truth is still your truth. You might see things differently than your spouse, different than your siblings or your friends. And that difference doesn't make you wrong. It doesn't make them wrong either. It just means you're standing in different spots, looking at the same storm from different angles. The danger comes when you start doubting yourself because they don't see what you see. When you silence yourself or you shrink back or you start thinking, maybe I'm the crazy one. You're not crazy and you're not alone. And your experience is still valid, even if no one else agrees with you. Healing doesn't come from waiting for everyone to get on the same page. Healing comes when you decide to honor what you see, what you feel, and what you know without apology, without waiting for approval. And I think that's one of the most important lessons my dad's story gave me because he was never just one thing. To me, he was both the man whose drinking left an imprint on my childhood and the man who lived 35 years as a beautiful, sober version of himself. Both stories are true. Both shaped me. And if there's one thing I want you to carry from this episode, it's this. Two different truths can exist at the same time. Yours is still yours, and it's still valid. So here's my invitation. Where in your life right now are you discounting your own experience because the people around you don't see it the same way? Sit with that, journal on it, but don't stop there. Ask yourself, what can I do to strengthen myself so I don't need outside validation to honor what I know is true? Because reclaiming your perspective isn't about wallowing wallowing in what's been dismissed. It's about anchoring yourself in what's real and letting that truth make you stronger, clearer, and steadier. If this episode stirred something in you, I invite you to stay with it. Don't rush it, don't rush past it. Just let it settle and process. And if you want to keep walking this path with me, subscribe so you'll be the first to know when the next episode drops. We're not rushing here, we're not forcing, we're just gently but firmly reclaiming what's always been ours.